Hi, my name is Aaron, and this is my show, Re-Education, and today I'm going to talk about anarcho-communism, specifically what it is. Now, in the past, I've defined anarcho-communism as the worker control and ownership of the means of production and the abolishment of all unnecessary hierarchies. Now, I personally like using those terms because I find them to be descriptive. I find them to be accurate and good terms to use when describing what my ideology is. Of course, because of the way that language works, you can choose to use other descriptors so long as they have the meaning, the abolishment of all unnecessary hierarchies, and the worker control and ownership of the means of production. You can call me a banana communist if you so choose, but I prefer to use the definitions that I have given. Now, what is anarcho-communism, though? That definition, though it is helpful to a point, doesn't exactly explain what it is. And what it is a solution, an economic solution, to capitalism. You see, under a capitalist structured society, the means of production, the planes, trains, automobiles, all of the resources and equipment used to be able to produce goods and services in the system is owned by the private capitalists, by private businesses. Now, in an authoritarian communist structured society, or a state capitalist one, similar to the Soviet Union, the state or the government is the one that owns and controls the means of production. And finally, when we're talking about an anarcho-communist structured society, the workers own and control the means of production. But what does it mean to have the workers control and own the means of production? I mean, during the Soviet Union, they had to violently overthrow all of the capitalists and steal their property so they could give it to the state and have everything government run. Now, is that something that anarcho-communists necessarily want to do? Well, all anarcho-communist structured societies can be structured differently. There are many different ways that you can go about achieving such a structure of society. Now, I've narrowed it down to 3. Now, these are not the definitive 3, but these are the 3 that I think about most readily when I think about how we could own and control the means of production. Now, the first thing is violence. That's how a lot of revolutions happen. They violently overthrow the dictator, similar to the way that they did it in France when they hauled out the oligarchy from their castles, put them up on a pedestal, and chopped off their heads. That is one way to perform a revolution, and it's definitely a very quick one. I would not necessarily say the best one, though, as it tends to make it a little bit difficult for a lot of the people who, specifically nowadays, are nonviolent to get on your side. Now, of course, the other solution, the one that I more commonly advocate for, is competition. Competition in the marketplace, making it hard for other systems to function. Now, when I'm talking about the worker control of the means of production, specifically in a competitive market, I'm talking about creating worker co-ops. Worker co-ops are basically worker-controlled organizations, businesses, that allow the people to decide what they want to produce, how they want to produce, where they want to produce, and what they want to do with the profits. It's basically a microcosm of communism, in my definition. And that allows for the people to, instead of giving their surplus labor value to a boss or a CEO, they are able to collectively own that business and share the resources amongst themselves, inevitably allowing people that are doing the same exact job in a co-op as they were in a capitalist business to be able to make far more money, more competitive. More people would choose to go and work for a co-op than they would a private business because they would make more money and they would have a part ownership in that business and all of the good feelings that go along with owning something and making it better and working hard and getting from your labor what you put in. Now, unfortunately, that is a slow solution. It does take a certain amount of time. And under the system that we are in, the private capitalists don't want that sort of system to flourish. So they do and have done and made very many strides in making it harder for you to even create such a business. And if you can create such a business, it's hard for you to trade. And for the most part, people haven't even heard of such a thing. I personally hadn't even heard of that form, that structure of business until at least very recently in the grand scheme of things. It's not something that I was necessarily taught while I was going to school. It's something that I had to find out for myself. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that most people haven't heard of this. It's just my personal experience, but I believe that my personal experience is very similar to a lot of people on this front. And unfortunately, without the ability for us to be able to do things like larger corporations are able to do, like get 0% interest business loans, like they just gave out willy-nilly after the crash of 2008 to the big banks. Without us being able to do that as collective organizations, it's very hard for us to be able to pool our resources together and start a worker cooperative or a collective business. So there is the third option, which is legislative. Now, legislatively, we don't have to use violence to stop the private capitalists from owning and controlling the means of production. It just means that we pass some laws to make it illegal for them to do so. We pass laws to make it illegal for them to own public property, for them to own the property that should be collectively owned by all of us. Now, to explain that, I have to give a little bit of history. Now, throughout evolutionary history, throughout about 100 million years of human evolution, while we were hunter-gatherers, we didn't need anything known as property rights. Property rights would have been looked at as being offensive. Because if you look at a nomadic tribe or a hunter-gatherer tribe, they work together and produce from the land that they are on to better their society and to better themselves. If one specific hunter-gatherer came up to the rest of the group and said, "Hey, all of the fields and animals are now mine, you have to pay me a fee to use them," everyone else would have looked at them and laughed, because the fields and the animals were owned collectively. They were owned by the people who worked them, who used them, who grew them, who bred them. That was theirs. It wasn't somebody who arbitrarily came and took them or decided to say that they owned them. But over time, one or two of these individuals were able to gain power through coercion or violence, and were able to use that power to steal from that community all of the resources that would have otherwise been used collectively. And they held it captive from everyone else and said that it was theirs. That's how you got things like oligarchies and kings and queens and royalty. They stole from the people what was collectively owned, and then they basically forced you to work for them in various different ways so you could get a piece of it. That's not exactly a fair situation, and to me, it would seem like in the past it has created all sorts of problems. In the first place, it created the difference between serfs, peasants, and the royalty, which immediately creates a class structure where the serfs and peasants are the ones that are doing all of the labor, and all of the kings and queens and royalty are making all of the profits. Then we move forward, and we see that it creates, again, another problem where all of the private capitalists are the ones that are owning and controlling all of the means of production, all of the good land resources and so on, and the working class has to work the land for them to produce a profit. And we even seen that the same situation works under slavery. It's the exact same situation that we had when we were basically holding on to slaves. The slaves would do all of the work for the private slave owner, and the private slave owner would own and control all of the good land resources and what have you, and make the profit. You see, this is a system that basically just morphs and changes and becomes the same system over and over and over again. They came along and used that force to steal that property that was collectively owned, and they decided to call it something new. It was no longer collective property, it was private property. Privately owned by them, not you. That's the way that they made the system. That is how they structured it. And that is something that we can legislate. We can make it illegal for people to own their private property, this property that they stole from us collectively in the first place, and we can make it so that the only way that you can gain more than anyone else is by working for it instead of just basically having it given to you as an inheritance, or being able to hoard that wealth and steal things from the society. But this system, this cyclical structure of haves and have-nots continuing throughout history to rebirth and rebrand itself under different names, oligarchy, slavery, capitalism, and so forth, authoritarian communism or state capitalism as well, even though it has been able to reform itself in different ways throughout history, we have for some reason not been able to find a way to stop it. Throughout all this time, we continuously see these structures get created, basically reform and morph and adapt to the current society. And that's because we haven't gotten rid of the fundamental problem with the system, which is the unjustified hierarchy. When we are talking about our system right now, our elected representative democracy, we're talking about a system that inherently allows for an unjustified hierarchy. When you have more money, you can buy more advertising. When you have more advertising, you essentially buy more votes. And when you get more votes, you win. And that is how our representative democracy chooses leadership currently. That is what you call an unjustified hierarchy. Now, a justified one would not just be determined on who is the best at winning elections or who has the most money to buy an election. It would be determined on how good somebody is at that job, how skilled they are at doing that particular thing, or how much skill is involved, how much knowledge is involved in doing that particular job. The idea under anarcho-communism is to actually have a real, true meritocracy. Meritocracy I'm defining as this: you get out from your labor what you actually put in. The laziest people on earth at the moment are the millionaires and billionaires. They're the ones that work the least, and yet they get rewarded the most. But you, the workers, the people who go to work every single day and bust their asses, are not granted that same benefit. You are not granted the ability to just slack off and do nothing. You have to work for every dime you have. You are not the one who is lazy. They are. And if you actually want to live in a system where your work gets you what you want, then capitalism is clearly a flawed system. And you probably want something that works a little bit better. Now, again, you can eliminate this unjustified hierarchy through a violent revolution, and that is a viable method and has worked in the past. But personally, as I have stated just a few minutes ago, I prefer the competition method, which is a bit slower, but does allow us to create an anarcho-communist structured society for the capitalist structure to collapse into once it inevitably does collapse, and I have many videos explaining how it is going to collapse. Or, again, we can solve this legislatively and make it illegal for there to be any form of unjustified hierarchy. Now, of course, there is going to be the caveat that everybody is going to basically say in the comment section, yes, you can have the competition method, but once the private capitalists start to catch on, they're going to make it incredibly difficult for you, and they might resort to violence. Yeah, that is possible. And also, legislatively, it is, first of all, extremely difficult for us to get that legislation passed because the private capitalists and the elites own all of the government, so that would make it very difficult for us to do something like that. And yes, I agree, that is true. But also, they, if we do get that legislation passed, might resort to violence. And yes, that is, again, another fear. Anytime, even if we are completely nonviolent in our revolution, anytime that we are taking power away from the people who have it currently and distribute it to the people who actually deserve it, you have to worry about them violently retaliating against you. What I always say is, hope for peace, prepare for war. I don't want there to be a war, but that is not up to me, and that is not my decision. Like I said, I decide, choose, hope for, and advocate for the competition method. And I personally think that nonviolence is the answer, the only true answer. A lot of my fellow comrades don't look at things the same way. They look at my ideas as being a bit slow. And yes, the legislative method might be a bit faster, but a little bit harder to achieve in my estimation. And the violent revolution idea, to me, doesn't seem like the best solution either. Because a lot of people, a lot of good, innocent people who don't know how to fight and who don't know how to take up arms at the moment might die. And I don't want them to. I personally want the structure, the way that it is, to fundamentally change without having anyone die. So what exactly is anarcho-communism? Well, it's the flattening or reorganizing of the hierarchy and granting the workers control and ownership over all of the means of production. That's what it is. And that's what I mean when I say it. Anyway, this has been my show, Re-Education. My name is Aaron. Thanks for watching.